All right, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Once again, we are back taking a look at the topics. Today is Thursday, September 12th, and we have Invest 95L to talk about here today. A wave of low pressure in the Bahamas that has become much more threatening to Florida and the East Coast here through the weekend. So yesterday, if you remember, we talked on Facebook about the system potentially drifting across South Florida as a rainmaker, getting into the Gulf, and then potentially making a second landfall somewhere on the East Coast or the East Coast of the Gulf of Mexico on late this weekend or early next week. So that was generally the plan as we've seen it for the last 2 days. However, what we've seen today is that plan no longer looks to be likely. What we have is basically an upper level low that's over the central Gulf of Mexico, and then we have the surface low that's associated with 95L. So the one in the Gulf is way up in the upper levels, and the one in the Bahamas is more on the surface. So what we had seen was we were expecting our friend here to drag the system in the Bahamas along with it. However, two things really happened. One, the upper level low along the Gulf Coast moved faster than expected. So I'm gonna take the satellite, the longer term satellite, back to about about 10:30 last night. This is the upper level low across Florida. It had moved over the state throughout the day, and it was supposed to be dragging the system with it. However, the low pressure that was in this area on the surface that was kind of being tugged along with it pretty much fell apart. The upper level low here just kind of died. You can see it across the Bahamas. You can see some a little bit of convection right here, but generally the low just kind of falls apart. And right there, you can see there's pretty much devoid of all activity and showers. And now the circulation center reformed back over here while our upper level low is still over here. And now they're too far apart to feel each other's pull. And no longer do we believe the system is going to follow its friend directly into the Gulf. It may take more of a northerly route. So this changes almost everything because now instead of a rainmaker across Florida into the Gulf where we're going to see a potential tropical storm, we now have a potential tropical storm sooner and much closer to Florida and the East Coast than we did yesterday. So that's kind of the big changes from yesterday, guys. Let's look at the current Hurricane Center forecast and to remind everybody, this is not a tropical storm yet. It's healthy, but it's still very sheared, and it does not have a closed circulation center yet. So with that in mind, the Hurricane Center still has an 80% chance of development over the next 5 days and 70% in the next 2 days. So they believe there's a very high chance that this becomes tropical storm, or at least tropical depression 9, if not tropical storm Humberto, by tomorrow afternoon, tomorrow evening. What they've also said in this discussion is they believe potential tropical cyclone watches or warnings could go up, or tropical storm watches and warnings could go up, and this could become a potential tropical cyclone. This is what they do whenever the thing's close to shore, but it's not formed yet. They can call it a potential tropical cyclone, which is like soon to be tropical storm, wave their wand just so they can go ahead and get watches and warnings out for parts of the east coast of Florida, or wherever else the system might be at the time. So if you see potential tropical cyclone 9 or something, that's just it's almost there. We just want to go ahead and get the warnings out, is all that means. It will become a tropical storm at some point. So I know it's confusing. I don't like it either, but I don't know why they can't just set the watches and warnings while the thing hasn't formed yet. But they, like most weather people, we overthink things and then make up rules to fix the rules that we made up ourselves. Anyway, what we're talking about is the fact that this system may become a tropical storm. Now, there's two different scenarios here, really kind of on the table still. We still have the scenarios where this thing is weaker and it drifts more west. Here's kind of the rule of thumb with this system. There's going to be two components to this. One, the strength. Two, where it forms. The strength will determine exactly what kind of track it takes in the short term. Weak high pressure is trying to guide it on the surface, and stronger high pressure is trying to guide it further north aloft. And then in upper levels, our upper level winds are also shearing one side of the storm. What it comes out to be is this: you're going to have pretty much a net flow of more north in the upper levels and more west in the lower levels. If the system is weak, it only really feels a lower level flow, and it was more likely to drift in some component towards Florida. Okay. If the system becomes stronger, it will then feel more of a northerly tug, and it will try to turn at some point if it's stronger. However, that turn is more indicative of when exactly it becomes stronger. The second part to this problem is where exactly the storm forms. Right now, the low level circulation is somewhere right about here. That's where the GFS sees the storm right now, which is kind of good for the GFS. The European model sees it a bit further north. If the system develops, like, say, down here, even if it turns more north, it's got to go into Florida. But if it develops more north, then it gives it more time to turn early. So that's kind of the differences we're watching right now is one, where does it form in here? Is it 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 here? And then from there, if is it weak and does it drift, or is it stronger and does it turn? These things are very hard to answer. We do have a hurricane hunter leaving Mississippi going to investigate this thing this afternoon, so we'll know a little bit more. But our models are going to take some time to catch up to that. That's why they're not very useful right now. But the GFS shows us one possible solution, which is a weak storm that develops further south and would still drift across Florida as a rainmaker, kind of as expected, and then hit the Panhandle or potentially the Gulf Coast as a weak tropical storm. However, models like the European model do disagree with that, and they take a stronger storm further north and approach Florida as a pretty healthy tropical storm right off the coast. And this is probably a bit too bullish. This just looks way too well organized that quick. But this is Sunday into Monday here, and then turns it offshore and goes out from there. So there's a couple different solutions on the table, and every possible solution between a strong storm offshore and a weak rainmaker exists. So parts of Florida need to take the storm very seriously and at least be watching this thing very closely, regardless of what exactly winds up happening as far as development or not. Heavy rains in store this weekend. That's one thing I can tell you for sure. That ain't going to change whether it's named or not. Heavy rains are in the forecast. Up to 5 to 6+ inches are forecast for most of the Florida Peninsula, especially Northeast Florida, where those bands could be coming on shore as early as tomorrow and through the weekend. And it may be a very wet weekend here on the first coast, regardless of development or not. If the storm were to develop, those rainfall totals may even go up from there, depending on the exact trajectory. If it goes anywhere south of us, we get the rainy side of the storm. So be aware of that. But the bottom line, guys, is this. We need to be watching this thing carefully because there is potential now that a tropical storm may form pretty quick tonight or tomorrow in the southern Bahamas, and it will approach the Florida coastline in some capacity going into the rest of the weekend. So tropical storm watches may go up as early as tonight for parts of central and south Florida, and then North Florida may not be far behind. There's a couple things that time out. Like I said, the positioning and the strength of the storm will determine exactly the path it takes, and then also this little cold front across the plains coming across may also have something to do with it, depending how that kind of shakes out. So there's a few things left to shake out, but things are going to fall into place fast. So be ready. I think everyone in Florida on the East Coast needs to be preparing for the prospect of a tropical storm this weekend. All the things you kind of secured for Dorian, you might have to do it again. I don't think this thing's going to be too particularly strong, but if those upper level winds begin to start shifting more out of the north and northeast or northwest, and they start or southwest rather southeast, sorry, southeast. There we go. Jeez. Then this thing might actually get a little bit of an enhancement, and it could spin up in a pretty quick hurry. So I don't think it's going to be a big organized like category 2, 3, 4 monster, but it could spin up pretty quick. So just be ready for that prospect. And then interest northward in the Carolinas and Georgia. You also need to watch this, and even my friends in the Northeast. Keep an eye on this because some models bring this offshore and then kind of hook it back in response to some upper level low cracking across next week. But that is way down the road for what we're talking about right now. So let's get through this first. But anyone on the East Coast needs to begin to start watching this closely and just follow along from there. So that's what I got for you guys this morning. Things are going to change fast and in a hurry, so please stay up to date. I will have all the updates going, as you guys know. So don't worry about that. But this one's going to be one to watch and one to watch very carefully as things have changed today. So that's what I got for you today, guys. Thanks for watching and have a good one.